You see, life has a way of testing us in ways we least expect. Michael was a hardworking man in his late 30s. The kind of guy people in his town looked up to. He had built a good life for himself. A steady job, a wife who adored him, and 2 little kids who thought the world of their dad. He wasn't rich, but he had enough. Enough to put food on the table, enough to live in a modest but warm suburban home, and enough to earn the respect of the community around him. People knew Michael as disciplined, dependable, and above all, fair. He believed in doing what was right, no matter how hard it was. But what people didn't know was that behind all that discipline and fairness, Michael carried a wound that had never really healed. Years ago, Michael had a best friend. His name was Ethan. They grew up together, from riding bikes as kids, to sharing dorm rooms in college, to standing side by side as they entered the workforce. They were brothers in every sense of the word except by blood. Michael trusted Ethan with his life. But one day that trust was shattered. Ethan betrayed him. And not in some small way. The kind of betrayal that changes everything. Michael had been up for a major promotion, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that could have changed his career forever. But Ethan, jealous, desperate, or maybe just weak, undercut him. He twisted the truth, spread lies, and took away everything Michael had worked so hard for. The fallout was devastating. Michael not only lost the promotion, he lost trust, friendships, and the brotherhood he thought was unbreakable. From that day forward, Michael swore one thing to himself, that Ethan would never, ever get a second chance in his life. So, Michael carried that resentment with him year after year. And on the outside, he moved on. But on the inside, he never really did. One rainy evening after a long day at work, Michael was driving home. The rain was coming down hard, the streets were slick, and visibility was low. Most drivers were rushing to get home, ignoring anyone or anything on the side of the road. But as Michael made his way through a dimly lit stretch of highway, his headlights caught something, or rather, someone. A man. Stranded. Struggling to move. Michael slowed down. His first instinct was hesitation. After all, it was late, it was raining, and this wasn't exactly the safest place to pull over. But Michael's conscience tugged at him. What if this was someone's father? Someone's brother? Someone's son? So, despite every reason to keep driving, Michael pulled over. He got out of his car, ran through the pouring rain, and approached the man who looked badly injured. And that's when his heart nearly stopped. Because as Michael got closer, he realized who it was. It wasn't just some stranger. It wasn't just another man who had fallen on hard times. No, it was him. It was Ethan, his enemy. The very man he had sworn never to forgive. And at that moment, Michael froze. Would he walk away and leave Ethan to his fate? Or would he choose to help the one person he hated most in this world? The answer would change everything. But what Michael decides to do next will test his heart in ways he never imagined. Michael stood there in the pouring rain, his clothes drenched, his shoes sinking into the muddy roadside. His heart pounded as he stared down at Ethan. The man who had destroyed his trust, the man who had cost him years of peace. Ethan was barely conscious, clutching his side in pain. His face was pale, his clothes soaked through, and his voice was weak. "Michael," Ethan whispered, his eyes widening in disbelief. It's you." For a moment, Michael couldn't move. He felt frozen, like the world had stopped spinning. Every memory of betrayal came rushing back. The lies, the humiliation, the career opportunities he lost, the anger he had carried for so long. And now, here Ethan was, broken, desperate, and completely vulnerable. Michael's mind screamed at him, "Leave him. This is karma. He deserves this." But another voice, quieter, yet stronger, whispered, "He's still a human being. He's still in need." Michael clenched his fists, his breath heavy. He could feel the battle raging inside of him. Years of bitterness pulling one way and the weight of compassion pulling the other. Finally, through gritted teeth, Michael muttered to himself, "I can't believe I'm doing this." He knelt down beside Ethan, his hands shaking as he tried to lift him. Ethan winced in pain, groaning. "Please, don't leave me here," he whispered. Michael didn't answer. He just hauled Ethan to his feet, half carrying, half dragging him back to his car. The drive to the hospital felt like a lifetime. Rain pounded against the windshield, and silence filled the car. The only sound was Ethan's labored breathing. Michael's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to feel any of this. He just wanted to drop Ethan off and walk away. But when they arrived at the hospital and the nurse explained that Ethan had no insurance, no money, and no one else to call, Michael felt a pit in his stomach. Against every instinct, against every ounce of pride he had left, Michael pulled out his wallet. He covered part of the medical bill. He couldn't explain why. Maybe it was duty. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe, just maybe, it was that voice again. The one telling him that true character is revealed not when it's easy to help, but when it's hardest. Days later, Michael visited Ethan in the hospital. He didn't want to. In fact, he told himself 100 times not to go. But something pulled him back. When he walked into the room, Ethan's eyes lit up with a strange mix of relief and shame. "You didn't have to do this," Ethan said softly, his voice hoarse. "After everything I did to you, I don't deserve your help." Michael's jaw tightened. He wanted to say something cutting. He wanted to remind Ethan of every scar he had left behind. But instead, he said nothing. He just stood there, watching a man who used to be invincible now look so broken. And then Ethan began to speak. He talked about how his life had spiraled after that betrayal. How the lies he told to get ahead only led him deeper into failure. How he had burned bridges, ruined relationships, and found himself alone. There was no pride in Ethan's voice anymore. Only regret. But there was also something else. Resentment. "You know what's funny?" Ethan muttered bitterly. "Even after what I did, your life still turned out better than mine. You've got a family, a home, stability. And me? Look at me now." Michael's stomach turned. Anger flared in his chest. How dare Ethan play the victim? How dare he act like Michael hadn't suffered too? But at the same time, Michael saw something in Ethan's eyes he hadn't expected. Not arrogance, not defiance, but shame. A man crushed by his own choices. And for the first time in years, Michael wondered, had he been holding on to his pain longer than Ethan had? Had his hatred been eating away at him just as much as Ethan's guilt had been eating away at Ethan? But just when Michael thought he understood the weight of this moment, Ethan would reveal something shocking. A secret that turned everything upside down. Days passed, and Michael kept visiting Ethan at the hospital. He told himself it was just to check on the bills he had covered, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. Something about seeing Ethan like this, weak, humbled, broken, had stirred emotions Michael thought he'd buried forever. Each visit was tense. They exchanged few words. Michael kept his distance, arms folded, standing near the doorway while Ethan lay in bed. But there was always this heavy silence in the room, as if both men were trapped in the weight of their past. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered weakly through the hospital blinds, Ethan turned to Michael and said something Michael didn't expect. "Michael," he began, his voice low and shaky, "there's something I never told you. Something I should have said a long time ago." Michael narrowed his eyes. He didn't want to hear excuses. He had lived too many years with unanswered questions. He almost walked out of the room right then. But something about Ethan's tone. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't manipulative. It was almost pleading. Ethan swallowed hard. His hands trembled against the thin hospital blanket. "You think I betrayed you because I wanted to, because I was jealous or greedy. And part of that is true. But it wasn't the whole story." Michael's brow furrowed. He stayed silent, waiting. Ethan's eyes darted toward the ceiling, as if searching for the courage to continue. "Back then, I was backed into a corner. I was being blackmailed. By someone powerful in the company. They found out about mistakes I made, stupid mistakes that could have cost me everything. And they told me either I'd take the fall with you, or they'd ruin me completely. I panicked. I chose the coward's way out. I sacrificed you to save myself." Michael's fists tightened. His chest heaved with anger. "You let me take the hit," he said sharply, his voice cutting through the air. "You destroyed everything I worked for, just to protect yourself?" Ethan's eyes glistened with tears. I know I did. And I've hated myself every day since. You think you're the only one who lost something that day? Michael, I lost you. I lost the only real friend I ever had. And nothing I've done since has ever filled that void. Michael shook his head, pacing across the small room. His blood boiled. Years of bottled-up rage poured out of him in that moment. You don't get it, Ethan. You didn't just cost me a promotion. You cost me my trust in people. You made me build walls so high that even my own family can't always climb over them. You ruined the part of me that believed in loyalty, in brotherhood. Ethan broke down, his voice cracking. And I've been carrying that guilt every single day. I know I can't undo it. I know I can't earn your forgiveness. But I had to tell you the truth before it's too late. For the first time, Michael saw something he never expected to see in Ethan's eyes. Not arrogance, not bitterness, but genuine remorse. Real pain. The kind of pain that doesn't fade with time. Michael stood there, torn apart inside. His anger screamed at him to never forgive, to walk out and never look back. But another feeling tugged at him. A quiet recognition that maybe, just maybe, Ethan's suffering was its own kind of punishment. The room was heavy with silence. The weight of two men's pasts pressing down on them both. But here's the thing. When a truth like this comes out, it forces a choice. Michael stood frozen by Ethan's hospital bed. His chest was tight, his fists clenched at his sides. His mind replayed Ethan's words over and over, "I sacrificed you to save myself." It felt like ripping open an old wound. Every sleepless night, every bitter memory, every wall he had built around his heart, it all came crashing back at once. Michael wanted to scream, to walk out, to slam the door and leave Ethan alone with his regrets. That would have been easier. That would have felt like justice. But as he looked at Ethan, his once best friend, now a broken man with tears streaming down his face, Michael saw something that shook him. This wasn't the same arrogant, ambitious friend he had once known. This wasn't a man still chasing power at all costs. This was someone crushed under the weight of his own mistakes. Someone who had carried his guilt like a chain for years. Michael's heart wrestled with his pride. He thought about all the years he had wasted being angry. How his hatred had followed him home from work. How it had crept into his marriage. How it had hardened him with his own kids. And in that moment, Michael realized something powerful. By holding on to his anger, he hadn't just punished Ethan, he had punished himself too. Michael took a deep breath, his voice trembling as he finally spoke. "You're right, Ethan. You can't undo what you did. And I can't pretend it didn't hurt. But I can't keep carrying this anymore either. Because every day I've hated you, I've been giving you power over my life. And I'm done with that." Ethan's eyes widened, his lips quivering. "Are you saying you forgive me?" Michael nodded slowly, though the words were heavy. "I don't know if I'll ever forget, Ethan. But I forgive you. Not for your sake but for mine. Because I refuse to let the worst thing you did define the rest of my life." The room fell silent. Ethan broke down completely, sobbing into his hands. It wasn't the tears of a manipulator. It was the release of years of guilt finally confronted. For the first time in decades, the tension between the two men began to ease. Not vanish completely but loosen its grip, like chains falling away one link at a time. When Ethan was discharged from the hospital weeks later, Michael was there. He didn't drive him home. He didn't offer to start over as best friends. But he did something Ethan never thought possible. He shook his hand. That handshake wasn't just a gesture. It was a closing of a chapter. A way of saying, we're not what we used to be, but we're no longer enemies either. As Michael drove home that evening, the rain had cleared. The sky stretched wide and calm above him. And for the first time in years, his heart felt lighter. He wasn't carrying the weight of anger anymore. He knew he hadn't just set Ethan free. He had set himself free. But what does this story really mean for us? You see, life doesn't always test us in the ways we expect. Sometimes the real test isn't in how we treat strangers, but in how we treat the very people who once broke us. For years, Michael believed holding on to his anger was strength. He thought that by never forgiving Ethan, he was keeping control. But the truth was, the bitterness had been controlling him all along. It shaped how he trusted people, how he lived, and even how he loved. It took one act of kindness, stopping on a rainy night, when he least wanted to, for Michael to come face to face not just with his enemy but with himself. Forgiving Ethan didn't erase the betrayal. It didn't undo the past. But it did something even more powerful. It freed Michael from it. And Ethan? He walked away humbled. He knew forgiveness didn't mean things would go back to how they once were. But that small act of mercy gave him something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope that even broken people can rebuild. Moral of this story: true kindness demands courage, especially when it's shown to those who least deserve it. Forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay. It's about refusing to let the pain of the past rob you of peace in the present. And sometimes, facing your enemy isn't about defeating them. It's about healing the wounds they left behind so you can move forward lighter, stronger, and free to. So the next time life puts you face to face with someone who hurt you, remember Michael's story. You can choose to stay chained to anger, or you can choose the harder, braver road: kindness and forgiveness. Because in the end, kindness doesn't just change others. It changes us. So what do you think? If you were in Michael's shoes, would you have stopped to help Ethan? Or would you have kept driving? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this video touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change the world. And remember, we're not just telling stories. We're changing lives.